They bulldozed a 20-year-old living wall off my property while I was out of town for a weekend. And when I got back, it wasn't just gone. It was like someone had peeled away a layer of privacy I didn't even realize I depended on. What they didn't know was that I wasn't the kind of person who argues first. I'm the kind who documents and then waits. I had been gone for exactly 2 days. Left Friday afternoon, came back Sunday night. Nothing unusual, just a quick trip out to see my sister in Columbus. It was one of those quiet drives back, where you're half tired, half thinking about Monday, already mentally unpacking your week before you even pull into your driveway. But the moment I turned onto my street, something felt off. Not wrong in a loud way. More like when a familiar room suddenly feels too big. I couldn't place it at first. Then I pulled into my driveway, and it hit me all at once. There was nothing there. Where there used to be a dense wall of green, thick arborvitae, easily 15 feet tall, grown in over 2 decades, there was now just dirt. Raw, torn up, uneven dirt. The line between my yard and my neighbor's was completely exposed, like someone had taken a knife and sliced the property open. For a second, I just sat in the car, engine still running, staring, trying to convince myself maybe I was just tired, maybe it looked worse than it was. But no, it was gone. Not trimmed, not damaged. Gone. Roots ripped out, soil churned, clumps of broken branches scattered like debris after a storm. Except this wasn't a storm. Someone had done this. On purpose. Now here's the thing about those trees. They weren't decorative. Not really. Yeah, they looked nice, a clean, uniform green wall. But they did a lot more than that. They blocked wind that cut across the street in winter. They softened the sound of my neighbor's garage, which, until that night, I hadn't realized was actually pretty loud. And most importantly, they blocked headlights. My neighbor's driveway sat at just the right angle where, without those trees, every car pulling in would shine directly into my living room. Those trees were a buffer, a boundary, and they weren't shared. They sat about 3 feet inside my property line. I knew that because I had checked when I bought the house. Not obsessively, just responsibly. The previous owner had planted them, and the survey had been crystal clear. So as I stepped out of my car and stood there looking at that empty strip of land, one thought settled in real quiet and real steady. This wasn't a mistake. I didn't even go inside. Just turned, walked straight across the edge of my yard, and over to the neighbor's place. Their garage was open, lights on, and there it was, parked off to the side like it had nothing to hide, a rented mini bulldozer, still caked with fresh dirt. There were tools scattered around, a couple of empty water bottles, and the smell, that smell of freshly turned earth still hanging in the air. That's when he stepped out. Daniel Mercer, mid-40s, always kept things tidy, the kind of guy who power washes his driveway twice a year whether it needs it or not. We'd never had issues before, just the usual nods, occasional small talk. He wiped his hands on a rag when he saw me. Didn't look surprised. Didn't look guilty. Just casual, like I'd come over to borrow a wrench. I stopped a few feet away, pointed back toward the empty stretch between our houses. You take those trees down? No build-up. No small talk. He glanced over my shoulder, like he had to remind himself what I was talking about, then nodded once. Yeah, he said. They were getting out of control. Out of control. I let that sit for a second. They were on my property, I said. He shrugged. Some of them were leaning over into mine. That's not the same thing. He leaned against the garage frame, completely relaxed. They looked bad, he added. Honestly, they were kind of an eyesore. There it was. Eyesore. Funny how one word can flip a switch. I remember taking a slow breath right there, not because I was trying to stay calm, but because I needed to decide what kind of situation this was going to be. Some people want to fight. Others don't even realize they've started one. You have a survey done? I asked. He shook his head immediately. Didn't need one. It's obvious where the line is. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, because it told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't guessing. He was assuming. And people who assume usually don't check. I didn't argue. Didn't raise my voice. Didn't even step closer. Just nodded once, turned around, and walked back to my house. I could feel his eyes on me as I left, probably expecting something more dramatic, something louder, something he could push back against. But I didn't give him that. Because the truth is, the moment someone does something like that, something that confident, that careless, the argument is already over. You just haven't shown them yet. Inside, I went straight to the hallway closet. Top shelf. Pulled down the folder from when I bought the house. Closing documents, inspection reports, and right there in the middle, the survey. I spread it out on the kitchen table. Clean lines. Precise measurements. Every boundary marked down to the inch. And there it was. The hedge line. Clear as day. 3 feet inside my property. Not close. Not debatable. Definitive. I stood there for a while, just looking at it, tracing the line with my finger, thinking about how long those trees had been there, how many seasons they'd seen, how quietly they'd done their job, and how quickly someone had decided they didn't matter. The next morning, I made 2 calls. The first was to a licensed surveyor. The second, I didn't make yet, because timing matters. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that you don't correct someone like Daniel in the moment. You let reality do it for you. By early afternoon, the surveyor was out there. Tripod set up, measuring equipment aligned, taking his time, double-checking everything like it actually mattered, which, to me, it did. I stayed back, didn't hover, didn't interfere, just watched from my porch. And when he was done, he placed bright neon pink stakes along the property line, one after another, perfectly straight, and every single one of them sat 3 feet inside where those trees used to stand. Daniel came out about halfway through. You could see the shift in his posture before he even spoke. That easy confidence gone, replaced with something tighter. "What's all this?" he asked. I stepped off the porch, walked over, and gestured toward the stakes. "Property line," I said. He frowned, looked from one stake to the next, then back at the dirt strip. "That can't be right." "It is." He didn't respond right away, just stood there, staring, doing the math in his head. And for the first time since I'd gotten home, he didn't look so sure anymore. He stood there longer than I expected, like if he stared hard enough, those pink stakes might just move on their own. They didn't. And that was the moment something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a subtle crack in the confidence he'd been leaning on since the day before. He let out a breath, rubbed the back of his neck, then looked at me again. "Well, all right," he said, dragging the words out a little. "If that's the case, just send me a bill for some new shrubs, and we'll call it even." Shrubs. I almost laughed, not out loud, just internally, because it told me he still didn't understand what he'd done. I shook my head slowly. "It's not that simple." He frowned. "Why not? Trees are trees, right?" And that right there, that sentence, that was the gap between how he saw it and how I did. I stepped a little closer to the line, gesturing toward the empty stretch. "Those weren't starter plants from a garden center," I said. "Those were mature arborvitae, 15 feet tall, planted over 20 years ago." He crossed his arms, already defensive. "So? You can replant them. You can't replace 20 years overnight." He exhaled sharply, like I was making things difficult on purpose. "Look, man, I'm trying to be reasonable here." I met his eyes. "So am I." And I meant that. Just not in the way he hoped. That afternoon, I made the second call. Not to a lawyer. Not yet. I called a landscaping company, one that specialized in mature tree installation. Not the kind that sells you a few shrubs and waves goodbye. The kind that shows up with cranes and flatbeds and actually understands restoration. A guy named Victor came out the next morning. Late 50s, sun-weathered face. Walked the property like he'd seen this kind of thing before, and honestly, I got the feeling he had. He didn't say much at first. Just paced the length of the dirt strip, crouched down, picked up a handful of soil, let it fall through his fingers. "You had a good barrier here," he said finally. "Yeah." He nodded. "Root systems were probably doing half the work holding this slope together." That caught my attention. "What do you mean?" He pointed toward the slight grade leading down toward Daniel's driveway. "Rain hits this now, you're going to see movement." Movement. That was one way to put it. We talked through options. Not hypotheticals. Real replacements. Mature arborvitae, similar height, similar density, transported, installed, stabilized. It wasn't quick. It wasn't easy. And it definitely wasn't cheap. When he handed me the estimate later that day, I didn't react. Didn't flinch. I just nodded, folded it once, and thanked him. Because the number didn't surprise me. It matched exactly what I already knew. Value isn't just about what something costs to buy. It's about how long it took to become what it is. That evening, I walked over next door again. Daniel was in his driveway this time, spraying off some dirt that had already started collecting near the edge. Funny how fast things change. I held out the estimate. He glanced at it, barely interested at first, then actually read it. And then he laughed. Not a chuckle. A full, disbelieving laugh. You're out of your mind. I didn't respond right away. Just let him sit with it. That's insane, he continued, shaking the paper. No one spends that kind of money on trees. No one removes them either, I said evenly, unless they're prepared to replace them. He handed the paper back like it offended him. I'm not paying that. I took it, folded it again. Then we'll have to handle it another way. He smirked, like that was some kind of bluff. Do what you gotta do. That's the thing about people who think they're in the right. They don't hear warnings. They hear challenges. I didn't argue, didn't threaten, didn't mention lawyers. Because honestly, I still wasn't thinking about court. Not yet. Instead, I made a different call. City office. Code enforcement. And I didn't mention the trees. Not directly. I asked about something else. Out of curiosity, I said, what are the requirements for removing a continuous natural barrier along a residential property? There was a pause on the line. Then typing. Then a response. Turns out, if you remove a natural barrier over a certain length, especially one that affects drainage or soil stability, you need a minor site alteration permit. Erosion control, runoff management, all that stuff most people don't think about until it becomes a problem. Was a permit filed for your property? The woman asked. I don't believe so, I said. Well, she replied, we can send someone out to take a look. 2 days later, a city inspector showed up. Clipped tone, clipboard in hand, the kind of person who doesn't care about neighbor disputes, just whether rules were followed. He walked the length of the exposed strip, took photos, measured the grade, checked the soil. Daniel came outside halfway through. What's going on? He asked, already irritated. The inspector didn't even look up right away. Routine check, he said. We received a report regarding unpermitted land alteration. Daniel glanced at me. That was the moment he realized this wasn't over. Not even close. The inspector finished his assessment, scribbled a few notes, then turned to Daniel. You'll need to install temporary erosion control along this stretch, he said. Silt fencing, minimum standard. Until vegetation is restored. Daniel blinked. You're kidding. I'm not. And if I don't? The inspector finally met his eyes. Then it escalates. Simple as that. By the end of the week, the bright orange silt fence went up. It ran the entire length where the trees had been. Ugly. Loud. Impossible to ignore. It didn't just replace the green wall. It advertised the mistake. Neighbors started noticing. People walking dogs slowed down, looked, whispered. Across the street, Mrs. Lang, who notices everything, asked me one afternoon, what happened to your trees? I just said, they were removed. She glanced at the orange barrier, then back at me. Huh, she said. That, carried more judgment than any argument ever could. And then it rained. Not a storm. Nothing dramatic. Just a steady, soaking rain over a couple of days. The kind that doesn't look dangerous. Until you see what it does. Without those root systems holding everything in place, the soil started to loosen. Shift. Slide. At first, it was subtle. A little runoff here. A bit of pooling there. Then more. By the second day, muddy water was moving steadily down the slope. And right into Daniel's driveway. Clogging the edges. Seeping into the gaps between his brand new decorative pavers. The same ones he'd had installed earlier that summer. The ones he'd proudly mentioned cost a small fortune. I saw him out there that evening, trying to hose it down. Mud spreading faster than he could clear it. Frustration written all over his face. I didn't go over. Didn't need to. Because sometimes, the lesson teaches itself. There was a knock on my door just after sunset. I already knew who it was. Daniel stood there, damp shoes, dirt along the hem of his jeans, looking tired. Not angry. Not confident. Just worn down. This is because of those stupid bushes, he said. I leaned against the doorframe. They were trees. He exhaled, ran a hand through his hair. All right, fine. Trees. A pause. Then, quieter. What do you want? And there it was. Not a demand. Not a challenge. A question. I didn't rush the answer. Didn't make it dramatic. Just gave it to him straight. Full replacement, I said. Mature arborvitae. Comparable height. Professionally installed. He nodded slowly, like he expected that part. And he asked. A 3-year maintenance guarantee, I added. And written acknowledgement of the property line. That last part made him look up. Seriously? Seriously. Because this wasn't just about trees anymore. It was about making sure we never had this conversation again. He let out a long breath. That's going to cost a lot. I nodded. So we'll fixing erosion damage. We stood there in silence for a few seconds, rain still dripping off the edge of the roof, the faint smell of wet soil in the air. And for the first time since this started, he didn't argue. He didn't say yes right away. And honestly, I didn't expect him to. Daniel stood there on my porch, looking past me for a second, not at anything specific, just thinking. You could almost hear the gears turning. Not about whether I was right. I think by then he knew I was. It was more about what it was going to cost him to admit it. Financially, sure, but also personally. Pride's an expensive thing to hold on to when reality keeps sending you invoices. I need a couple days, he finally said. I nodded once. Take them. No pressure. No follow-up. Because the situation wasn't going anywhere, and neither was the mud. Over the next 2 days, things got quieter between us. Not awkward. Not hostile. Just distant. The kind of silence that happens when two people both know exactly what the situation is, but one of them is still catching up emotionally. I noticed he stopped parking right at the edge of his driveway, probably trying to avoid tracking more dirt across the pavers. The orange silt fence was still there, bright as ever, fluttering slightly whenever the wind picked up. A constant reminder of how this all started. A couple neighbors had started talking more openly about it too. Nothing dramatic. Just those casual, half-lowered voices when people think they're being subtle. Did you hear what happened? I think he took out the whole line. Without checking. That last part always seemed to land a little heavier. Because that's really what this came down to. Not bad intent. Not some long-standing feud. Just assumption. And the kind of confidence that doesn't bother to verify itself. On the third morning, I heard a truck outside. Not unusual. We get deliveries all the time. But this one idled longer than most. I looked out the front window and saw Daniel standing at the curb, talking to someone in a reflective vest, pointing toward the side yard. Then another truck pulled up behind the first. Flatbed. And just like that, I knew. He knocked a few minutes later. Different energy this time. Still serious, but steadier. I've got a crew coming in today, he said. The company you recommended. I called them. I stepped outside with him. You're sure? He nodded. Yeah. I spoke to the guy. Victor, right? Yeah. He walked me through everything again, Daniel continued. Didn't sugarcoat it. That sounds like him. Daniel gave a small, almost reluctant smile. Then it faded. I'll cover the full install, he said. Maintenance too. And I'll sign whatever acknowledgement you need. I studied him for a second. Not suspiciously, just making sure this wasn't another half measure. It wasn't. All right, I said. Then we're good. And just like that, it was settled. No courtroom. No shouting match. Just resolution. The crew got to work quickly. If you've never seen mature trees being installed, it's a strange thing, almost surgical. Everything deliberate, measured, heavy machinery moving with surprising precision. They brought in 15 arborvitae, each one wrapped at the base in burlap, root balls massive, branches tied carefully to keep their shape intact. Even lying horizontally on the flatbed, they looked substantial, not decorative, established, like they belonged somewhere. A crane rolled in mid-morning, extended slowly over the yard, cables lowering one tree at a time into pre-dug holes that had been measured down to the inch. Victor was there, overseeing everything. Same calm presence as before. He nodded at me when he saw me watching. Won't take long, he said, but it'll take a while to feel the same. I knew what he meant. You can replace structure in a day, but you can't replace time. Daniel stayed outside most of the day. Didn't hover, didn't interfere, just watched. Every now and then, one of the crew would ask him something, and he'd respond quickly, almost eager to cooperate. At one point, he walked over to where I was standing. They're bigger than I expected, he said quietly, watching as another tree was lifted into place. They have to be. He nodded. I didn't realize how much those trees actually did, he added. I glanced at him. Most people don't until they're gone. By late afternoon, the line was restored. 15 trees, evenly spaced, standing tall again. Not identical to the old ones. Not yet, but close enough that, from a distance, you could almost forget what had happened. Almost. The crew finished securing them, setting up the initial irrigation system, going over maintenance instructions with Daniel. Paperwork was signed, including the acknowledgement. Clear boundary lines. No ambiguity. No assumptions. A few days later, the silt fence came down. The soil had been stabilized, the roots, new, but already doing their job, beginning to settle in. And just like that, The bright orange reminder disappeared, replaced by green. Again, life went back to normal, more or less. The street got quiet again. Neighbors stopped whispering. Mrs. Lang moved on to whatever her next point of interest was. And Daniel? Well, Daniel changed a little. Not dramatically. He still kept his place neat, still power-washed his driveway. But there was a hesitation now. A pause before action. We didn't become friends or anything like that. But the nods we exchanged after that, they meant something different. A couple weeks later, I was out in the yard early in the morning, coffee in hand, just standing there looking at the new trees. There's a moment right after sunrise where everything's quiet, like the day hasn't fully decided what it's going to be yet. Daniel stepped out of his house, saw me, and walked over. "No hard feelings?" he asked. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't forced. Just honest. I took a sip of coffee, thought about it for a second. "Depends," I said. He raised an eyebrow slightly. "On what?" I looked at the line of trees between us. "On whether you remember why they're there." He followed my gaze. Nodded once. "Yeah," he said. "I will." And that could have been the end of it. Clean. Wrapped up. Lesson learned. But here's the thing. Not everyone sees it the same way. A week later, I overheard two neighbors talking while walking past. One of them said, "Honestly, that seemed a bit extreme. Making him pay for all that." The other shrugged. "I mean, he did take the trees out." "Yeah, but still. Could have just split it or something." I didn't say anything. Didn't step in. Just let them walk by. Because that's the part people always debate, isn't it? Where's the line between holding someone accountable and going too far? So I'll ask you this. If someone removed something from your property, something that took 20 years to grow, something that served a purpose beyond just looking nice, would replacing it with something smaller be enough? Would an apology cover it? Or is accountability supposed to match the full weight of the damage, even when it's inconvenient? Because in the end, this wasn't really about trees. It was about boundaries. The visible ones and the invisible ones people assume they can cross. If you've ever dealt with something like this, a neighbor dispute, a property issue, anything where someone overstepped and expected it to just be no big deal, I'm curious where you landed. Would you have handled it the same way? Or would you have done something different? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read all of them. And if you think more people need to hear stories like this, go ahead and share it. Because sometimes the best lessons are the ones that cost just enough to stick.